Here with more is political science professor Bernard Thomas. He is also the author of The Demise and Rebirth of Our American Third Parties. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Let's talk about this. Senator Joe Manchin, he's been a swing voter in the last few years. He's both helped and hurt the Biden administration at times even. He says that registering though now without affiliation will help him speak to both sides. On the flip side, though, he'll continue to caucus with Democrats to keep his chairmanship. So really, talk about the semantics. Does this matter?
Well, what it might indicate is that he might be running again for office, because if he wanted to run in West Virginia as an independent, then he would have to register to run in August, and he would have to register as an independent 2 months ahead of time. So what's going on now in terms of him is he seems to be following strategies that we've seen him do before. He's creating uncertainty. He may not even have made a decision yet on what he wants to do, but it might suggest that he's going to still be involved politically.
So if he were to run, how much support would he get from independents, do you think, in his Republican-leaning state?
Well, he's a popular politician there, but he is not necessarily in a position to win, at least if he runs for Senate again. He would be going up against a very popular governor who's now running for a Republican governor. And so it's not clear that he could win that. He might try to run for governor himself. He used to be a governor there. And that might be a stronger possibility for him. Consider, by the way, in a larger sense, this is the first time since the 1930s that we've had 4 senators that are not Democrats or Republicans. This number is higher than it's been in a long time. It hasn't been higher than that since the 1890s. So it does suggest overall an interesting moment in American politics.
Well, let's talk about just the percentage of Americans identifying as independents. In 2023, 43% of Americans identified as independent, but only 10% are actually backing current candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Why do you think that is?
Well, for the independent candidates, it's kind of a paradox. And the paradox is that, number one, yes, the number of people that claim to be independents has been going up. But number two, the vote movement has actually been down. They actually act less like independents than they used to. Ronald Reagan won his second election by 60% of the vote, for example. That is something we have not seen in decades. Usually presidential elections are very close with very, very little movement. It used to be in states, lots of states, they'd vote for one person, one senator would be a Republican, one senator would be a Democrat. This has become less common. So what's going on here seems to be something called negative partisanship. That what's happening is people are becoming less and less happy with the political system and less happy with their own parties. But at the same time, even though, let's say, somebody who's a Republican doesn't necessarily like the Republican Party, they really dislike the Democratic Party. And that's the negative part. It's negative against the other party. And that seems to be leading people to be consistently voting with their own party. So in terms of RFK, right now the numbers are pretty high. But historically, for third parties, the tendency is their support drops as we move closer to the election.
And for people who, remember 2000, right, and blame Ralph Nader for the reason Al Gore didn't win, and they look at Ross Perot before that, third parties tend to be more interesting because we always have the same discussion about, when one day will there be a viable, really competitive third party, and who knows how many more cycles that will take if it ever happens. But they're interesting now for the real question of, does RFK, who does he help and who does he hurt? So when you look at the numbers, and he's in double digits in some critical states, he's going to be a force. I think this is an underplayed story of the current cycle. He's going to be a force in November. From your perspective, who does he help or hurt more, Trump or Biden, and where?
Well, I would say, I mean, if the first answer obviously is that we don't know that for sure, and often these candidates will be bringing in support from both sides. But what's interesting is watching how RFK is moving farther and farther to the right and seeming to position himself actually in an attempt to pull Republican voters. You wouldn't expect that from somebody who is from the Kennedy family, but that is certainly a possibility. While, let's say, Cornel West is a clear threat to the Democratic Party, with RFK, it could be either one. I mean, consider something very interesting that he's doing now. He's gaining ballot access by joining different parties, then using them as a way of getting on. Well, in California, he's joined the American Independent Party. The American Independent Party was George Wallace's pro-segregation party in the 1960s. And despite what RFK is saying, the American Independent Party has consistently been very, very far on the right, far to the right of the Republican Party. And this is kind of whether he's intending it or not, he is signaling to voters. It's a very strange move for somebody, considering that his father, Bobby Kennedy, was a big opponent of George Wallace. And now he's at least half-handedly embracing George Wallace's party.
That's a fascinating historical point. And to circle back to Manchin, it'll be fascinating the way November shakes out, what the final numbers are in the Senate. No surprise he left the Democratic Party, but the political math just got even more fascinating, and it was already fascinating. Professor Bernard Tomas, author of The Demise and Rebirth of American Third Parties. Really great conversation. Thanks for giving us some time.